Okay, so Notre Dame is the key piece of this next scenario where every result in college football is the same except for one, and it's in the SEC championship game. Instead of Alabama defeating Georgia, it is Georgia defeating Alabama and handing the Crimson Tide their second loss of the season. Heading into the conference championship game, Georgia was number 1 in the country. Alabama was number 3. Michigan was number 2. Cincinnati was number 4 heading into that conference championship game. If Alabama takes its second loss of the season, does it still make the college football playoff?
I'm going to say no. And I'm sure you guys probably noticed this. I started backing off that take as the more we saw of Alabama. Like if it would, because I think, it was pretty soon after getting beat. Like they bounced back with the Mississippi State game where they blew out Mississippi State. Then they beat Tennessee. They beat LSU. And it was probably like right around Mexico State where maybe I said that. But then, not being super impressive over Arkansas. And the Auburn game, definitely after the Auburn game, felt like I backed off it like, man, I don't know if this is still viable. I still would have put it on the table. But I feel like, maybe if it came down to a field goal, it was one of those really tight games, they would have overlooked it. But I don't know. The way that they kind of came, like I was envisioning a Bama dominance, losing barely to Georgia, then they're in. And that scenario didn't exactly unfold. So I would say a 2-loss Bama, the way they finished the regular season, overtime against, man, even as I say that, Bryce Young, best quarterback in football, like, you could hear him making the case. You could hear him making it. I could hear him now.
I think they made the case before it even started because you mentioned, all right, so the one loss comes on October 9th, 41-38 at Texas A&M. Like you mentioned, 40-point win at Mississippi State. The next week it's 52-24 against Tennessee, and then they struggle with LSU. Those are the 3 results between the loss to Texas A&M and the release of the very first college football playoff rankings. So with only that body of work, the selection committee got together and put them at number 2. There were teams with zeros in the loss column all up and down the college football playoff rankings, and they were behind Alabama, which was sitting there at number 2. Even those late season struggles that you mentioned, never fell lower than number 3. I think the favoritism that this selection committee showed towards Alabama from the start with that number 2 position, given the results that they had so far, suggests to me that Alabama would be a 2-loss non-conference champion, and Notre Dame fans would be absolutely furious. Strength of schedule becomes the big argument, and they end up getting left out where Alabama ends up getting either the 3 or the 4 seed.
Yeah, I think Bama's probably in here, actually. Under the same argument that I made earlier with Notre Dame's schedule being pretty poor. You lose to an A&M team that was respected quite a bit by the committee. The committee also seemed to have an infatuation with Arkansas, which I don't really get. And it also kind of respected Auburn for quite a while. So there, I mean, you lose, you beat Florida on the road. Obviously, Florida didn't finish extremely well. But still, a lot of these close wins that Bama has are better than almost anything Notre Dame has. Notre Dame has Wisconsin, and that's kind of it. So the committee is big on, hey, like we're more about quality wins than we are about the loss column, which is not always true. It's just kind of something they say, but their actions don't seem to back it up a whole lot when you look at sort of the down ballot in the top 25. I think they try to power rate like the top 5 or 6, and then they basically just use the rest of the top 25, filling it out like in a tiered type way based on how many losses you have in conjunction with what makes their ratings look better at the very top. Obviously, you got to kind of show your work, even if you're working backwards. But I think I would probably go Bama here, even though they looked pretty shaky down the stretch. It is interesting. Both of these teams would have lost to a team that is already in the playoff, right? So UGA beat Bama, and then Cincinnati beat Notre Dame. So you might get into a situation where you're comparing the quality of loss.
Oh, right? No, not the quality loss.
Don't you think so? I mean, Chip, they would say, look, we already deemed Cincinnati in our little boardroom here. We've deemed Cincinnati a playoff quality team. Okay. We've deemed Georgia a playoff quality team, obviously. Cincinnati won by double digits in South Bend. Bama on a neutral site against Georgia, who we have number one with a bullet, is how much did they lose by? Like, I think that's probably the key crux of this question, as Danny noted.
I think that one of the biggest boosts to Alabama in this scenario is how much the committee loved Ole Miss and how dominant Alabama was in that game against the Rebels. Ole Miss was never lower than number 16, which was their starting point at the beginning of the college football playoff rankings. In the 6 releases from the committee, 16, 15, 12, 9, 8, 8. The Rebels finished the season well. The Rebels finished the season with an upward trajectory. That win would be something that I think that Notre Dame would not have anything to compare to, and really helped Alabama, because Texas A&M, these were the 6 results: 14, 11, 16, 15, 25, 25. As the Aggies took a couple on the chin coming down the stretch, that hurt their stock. But again, Ole Miss, with it surging, I think the Rebels would be able to really be able to anchor the Crimson Tide. And what would, again, like, would that be the college football playoff disaster? Not just a 2-loss team in the playoff, but a 2-loss non-conference
non-champ,
keeping Notre Dame out.
Yeah, because especially the SEC favoritism, the Alabama favoritism, like, it would all have come to the forefront, and that would have been the most disastrous scenario, I think.